So this is the gospel according to Matthew, chapter 4, verses 18 through 22. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. This is the word of the Lord. So what I've prepared for you today is a poem, and it's a type of poem that originates in Japan, and it's called a zuhitsu. What that means is it's following the brush. So it's like a prose poem, stream of consciousness type piece. Jesus listens to Radiohead. I'd be crazy not to follow. Or Geppy, weird fishes. Follow where you lead. Because he's a punk. Some type of Malcolm X distorted crossed X with Gandhi. Salt march, sea salt, in the deepest ocean, where he finds two pairs of brothers, and they abandon their jobs because capitalism is malignant and only helps the rich. Because they believe in the backstreets raised hoodlum from Galilee who tells them to crush social norms because if it isn't found a family, then what's the point?
Hi. Having a tube put down your nose into your stomach really isn't as fun as it may seem. It was last Mardi Gras when I was put in the hospital to get a clean out through a tube in my nose. I was told by my favorite nurse, Amanda, that I would be given a cup of water with a straw, and I would just have to keep drinking and moving my throat while she pushed the tube down my esophagus. She told me that everyone she had done this to had thrown up when she reached their gag reflex. I was unnerved. I hadn't eaten anything in days to help with the clean out, and it would be a few days until I got the tube out and I could eat again. I closed my eyes, got my cup, and Amanda started pushing the tube down my nose. That was when she told me her favorite Bible verse, the beginning of Psalm 62. It reads, "For God alone my soul waits in silence. From him comes my salvation. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall never be shaken." Before I knew it, the tube was down my throat. What many onlookers would have seen as a pathetic moment, me underweight in my hospital bed, unwashed hair, tube going down my nose and taped to my cheek, became a sacred moment because of Amanda. What I and probably many of you thought of as disgusting, she saw as a way to help me alongside Jesus. Being diagnosed with a disease that is seen as gross has been difficult. I don't feel like I can talk to many people about it because what my disease entails is quite frankly not dinner table conversation. I didn't go to church during the inception of my disease because I was literally unable to sit in a room for an hour without having to run to the bathroom. Feeling gross and being seen as gross is not very fun. In our Bible verse, we see Jesus before he had a widespread reputation. This marks the beginning of his ministry. At this point, he had performed no miracles. There was no reason for Simon, Andrew, or any of the other fishermen he called to trust him in his vision. There was no reason for them to give up their livelihoods to follow a man who could promise them nothing physical in return. Being asked to follow Jesus and hang out with social outcasts like the lepers and prostitutes wouldn't have been a huge incentive for these men to sacrifice the lives they knew, and it probably seemed disgusting. The blind faith these disciples showed should be an inspiration to us all. My experience with Amanda made me want to exhibit the love that she showed me in God's name to others. My best friend was diagnosed with Crohn's about a year after I was. Receiving a text from him saying, "I don't know who else I can talk to about this, and I really need help," is an inspiring and humbling feeling. Being able to aid and walk with someone whom I love so dearly through this illness makes all of the previously unimaginable pain and suffering worth it to me. Providing support and comfort for someone the way Amanda did to me is a way that I can show the grace of God to the people in my life. Elsewhere, showing immediate and unwavering grace hasn't always been easy. Showing people patience and understanding in the face of rashness and ignorance isn't easy for me. Last year, a girl wanted to borrow my spoon at lunch, but said she knew I had a thing, which I think was my suppressed immune system being misinterpreted as germophobia. When people act ignorantly toward me, it has been hard for me to not immediately respond as lovingly as the disciples did. But Amanda and the stories of Jesus have showed me that everybody is worth patience. Patience to explain to people that just because I don't look sick doesn't mean that I'm not sick. Patience to explain to people at the beach that the broken blood vessels on my stomach are from my self-administered injections. But most importantly, I've learned that God always has the end game in mind. He isn't putting me through pointless pain. He is putting me through experiences to make me stronger as a person and help others see me as someone to look up to. God is working through all of us. It's how we show it that matters.
Good morning. At one time, some of you may have felt that your net is empty. You're frustrated, you're tired. Well, I've been in the same place. Let's take it back to about 5 years ago in 8th grade. I'm not sure what caused me to look at myself, but I did not like the person who I was. I became selfish and sensitive and inconsiderate. I prevented myself from becoming close with some really good friends that I have today just because I judged them for being not cool or different than I was. I was not happy. That summer, my mother told me that I was going to a conference in late July called Montreat. And let me tell you, I was mad. I had no interest in going. On the drive up, I could only think about how miserable this next week would be. I've never been comfortable with meeting new people. I had no interest in spending a whole week with my older brother. They took away our phones, and I wasn't really friends with anyone that was going. But I don't know what I was thinking. That week ended up being one of the best weeks of my life. And more importantly, the feeling didn't come immediately, but by the end of the week, I felt so much closer to God. Over the course of my next Montreat experiences, I learned to become a better man of God in so many ways. How did this happen? Well, when changes of heart happen like this in the Bible, it is inevitably tied to God's hand. Take Saul from our first reading as a perfect example. Saul, a hated persecutor of those who followed Christ, could not become a better man without the guidance of Jesus. The Lord led him in his journey as he learned to love. Saul was born again. Just as the Holy Spirit passed through me as I attended Montreat Youth Conference, and I, through time, have felt renewed. Every year I felt that more and more. Honestly, I was not aware of it at the time. However, last summer, one night the Holy Spirit came to me so powerfully. I felt the love of God through the music and the people and togetherness. Every night, thousands of youth would gather together to sing hymns, worship, and praise the Lord together. And this time, the sensation of love and oneness overcame me. God's love overwhelmed me that night, and I didn't know what to do. So, after one of our back home group sessions, I sat down with Chris, and I cried. I cried because I had no idea how to handle God's love. So all I needed to do was spread it. God's love is meant to be spread. My Montreat experience over the expanse of 4 years was my Saul's conversion. It gave me the opportunity to accept God's presence into my life. That, I believe, is an opportunity that we are all given. We can choose whether to live life putting ourselves first, which is how I acted before Montreat, or we can decide to put the Lord as number one in everything we do. So I made the conscious decision to do the latter, as we all should. Sure, it is easy to be a good Christian when you're surrounded by other good Christians at church or at a place like Montreat. The challenge is stepping out into the real world. and doing God's work and spreading his love no matter the situation. So if I really wanted to change, I had to actively do so. Montreat was the easy part, so I shifted my priorities. But before I explain, let's first go back to the fishing story that we heard. However, I'm going to refer to the version from Luke. Luke provides a few important details that we don't see in Matthew. Let me read this for you. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water, let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. Looking at this reading, while thinking of my own attempt to change, to follow God, to shift my default setting from selfishness to holiness, allowed me to look at this in a completely new way. At some point, we all stand before God. He calls us to do what we are meant for, and at that point, there are no excuses. My favorite line from this Luke reading is when Simon Peter answers, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything." I see this as a matter of priorities. We may work as hard as we can, but if we aren't working for the right thing, only a few fish will be caught. Sure, that work might bring temporary happiness, and that'll last, but as I learn, it goes away. Personally, my main priority used to be myself, and again, I was not happy. However, once we choose to trust God and follow him every day of our life, that, ladies and gentlemen, leads to a full net of fish. It leads to pure happiness. I also think it's equally important for us to care and love God's children each and every day. Whether it's your families or friends or even a stranger on the street, that act is loving God himself. Again, these were shown to me through Montreat. Montreat acting as my training wheels for life. Through that experience, I learned to trust the Lord, and my net was full of fish. The deep fulfillment I found there, which was deeper than the temporary happiness I could find by catering to my own ego, sparked my seeking for change. Montreat set my soul on fire and brought me closer to God. It helped me realize that I needed different priorities so that I could go out into the real world and follow God. I did this in multiple ways. First, I took the advice of my close friend, Trenton Sunmaker, to very simply pray every day. Just stay close with God no matter your situation, he would tell me, and that has made all the difference. Second, I decided to cut off some negative influence in my life. Since we are so greatly affected by those who surround us, I trimmed my group of friends and made sure that the people I hung out with were ones who would encourage my new path. And lastly, I made it a goal of mine to share that amazing love that God sends down to me, as well as all of you, every single second of every day. Every day I strive to find some way to bless others and help them find the full net of fish that God allowed me to get a glimpse of. After practicing these, I feel that my net is full. The fishermen worked hard all day and all night, but again, what were they working for? Themselves. When they took the leap of faith to trust in the Lord and fish for his sake, that is when their net became full. That is when all of our nets can become full. Selfishness is not the key to happiness. Put God first, put his children first. That is how we are able to make the fish last no matter the situation we are in. In Paul's letter to the Philippians, he writes from jail. However uncomfortable he is able to be a happy man. He continues to spread the gospel because he trusts in God. This kind of happiness lasts no matter what. It is unconditional. Again, before Saul's conversion to Paul, he persecuted Christians. He wanted to arrest disciples. When I chose to follow God and put him as the number one priority in my life, the deep fulfillment we are all meant for followed for me as well. The fish did not come because I acted from my own strength, my own priorities. The fish came because the followers trusted in the Lord. And let me tell y'all, it is easy to live selfish lives. It is our default setting. But we must actively work against that. Trust God. Put him first. Spread his love to others every single day. Be a fisher of men, and you will find your happiness. Thank you.
The fishermen in this story have been lauded so often for their faith. After all, they listened to the words of a supposed stranger without a second thought. Because of their faith, they were rewarded and brought into the fold of God because they heard the voice when no one else was listening. This is so often the message taken away from this story, and it's a valid one, but what if I told another story? Let us imagine this story again, but perhaps the fishermen are, rather than cleaning empty nets, cleaning their bounty on the shoreline, eager to return home to eat around the table with their loved ones. Let us imagine that their houses are right along the water, and they can hear, at the same time they hear Jesus, the voices of their wives and their children, growing louder and louder as the sun goes down and the families are gathering together in a time of community. Would the fishermen still have gone back to the sea and cast their nets as Jesus instructed? I suppose we'll never know. But somehow I suspect that with their hearts eager for home, their nets a little more full, and the voice of Christ only one of many, they may have stayed on the beach. This is the great challenge we so often face as Christians. For the fishermen described by Matthew, Jesus' call was easier to answer. There were no other voices in the way. They knew who Jesus was. He had been preaching for a long time on the shore. Even though he had just started his ministry, he was clearly a wise man, perhaps even a prophet. They likely knew of no calls from home, no responsibilities elsewhere, and perhaps most importantly, they had no fish. It is often much easier to hear God's directions when we have nothing to lose. When we are comfortable, however, this is when we begin to struggle. It's so hard to hear God's message, isn't it? I know that this is the equivalent of sermon T-ball, and I ask for forgiveness for being cliche, but I've had this problem weighing on me a lot recently. I am, like many of my peers at Youth Sunday, rapidly, and perhaps too rapidly, approaching a point of significant decision in my life: what to study in college. For those of you who wrestled with this question in your day, I imagine you can relate. The stress about average earnings and benefits, the fear of dissatisfaction, and what most gnaws on me, the worry that I will walk a path counter to God's vision. In years past, I have thought that God's plan sounded like a strange concept. After all, can I not choose for myself how I live my life? It sounded to me like predestination, which made me uncomfortable. But doth not the appetite alter? Perhaps this discomfort came from a place of teenage angst, which I will not pretend to be above, because that discomfort has faded somewhat. Now I feel that God must have a plan, or at least an idea of how we should live our lives best in His service. And this matters to me now more than it ever has, because I'm like these new fishermen, the fishermen not so ready to leap into their boats. I would like to be a pastor. The conundrum I face is determining whether or not that is what God has prepared for me. And since accepting that call would mean a life devoted to worship and service, I would like to ensure that it is, in fact, what I'm called to do. And as I said, this problem is compounded because I'm in the situation of our hypothetical fishermen. I have many places I may be able to catch fish. I have many voices from home, and I have some fish in my nets already. I have an education. I have a voice. I'm clearly not afraid of public speaking. I have nets at the ready, but a host calls from the shore, each member of the throng shouting instruction as to where I should cast. Some tell me to walk the path of a pastor. Some tell me to walk the path of a professor or actor or musician or engineer or lawyer or... Among all these voices, I cannot tell which is God's, which is my own, which is someone else's. I've tried prayer, I've tried thoughtful reflection, and I've tried so hard just to hear that one voice leading me to the path. Nothing's worked. Of course, maybe I haven't received a call yet. Maybe I've already received one and I'm not ready to heed it. Maybe I need to grow and change and develop before I can. And maybe all of this doubt and anxiety and struggle is part of my call. But I'm not the only fisherman on the shore. Do we not all have voices echoing to us from home, calling us to bring our fish? Do we not all have a mass of people standing at the edge of the ocean, calling us to cast out to one place or another? And do we not all wonder if Jesus is standing by our boat, asking us to go back to the sea? At the end of the day, if God is faithful to us Christians, if we believe he will always come to us first, all we can do is wait and pray. All we can do is embrace the unknown. All we can do is take a leap of faith and hope God catches us with open arms.